Hello and welcome to a brand new Arseblog Arsecast right here on arseblog.com. How are you? Hope you're well. Thank you very much indeed, as always, for being here. I hope this interlull is treating you fine wherever you are in the world. You're happy, healthy, safe, and doing okay. I am also doing okay, but feeling a bit under the weather. I still have this kind of cold thing and, not at 100%, but I suppose if there is a good time to be feeling a bit crook, as they say, it is during the interlull when there's not a great deal of football going on, apart from international football, but I don't really care as long as our guys come home safe and sound and ready to go next weekend, and hopefully by that stage I will be feeling better and ready to go. So I don't really have it in me to do a lot of pre-conversation waffle today, and in the absence of any substantial Arsenal news, I thought it might be interesting to take a look around at some of the stuff that's been going on this week, not least some of the off-field stuff involving Manchester City, legal challenges to the Premier League's rules and the way that all played out this week. So that, more, and a bit of Arsenal chat, and who better to do it with than Philippe Auclair. Good morning, Philippe.
Good morning to you, Andrew. Good morning, everyone.
It's been an interesting week, certainly, when it comes to the Premier League, when it comes to Manchester City, who did take a case, a legal challenge to the Premier League's, let me just make sure I've got this right, associated party transaction rules, and there was a tribunal, there were findings. Depending on who, before we get into the nuts and bolts of it, depending on what you looked at, you could be forgiven for thinking this was a victory for the Premier League. In other cases, it was it appeared as if it was a victory for Manchester City. I mean, to what do you put down the sort of discrepancy in the reporting on this? Because I know people have some strong opinions about that kind of stuff, but I'm curious as to your take on this.
I've tried not to form strong opinions on that because I have to say that maybe it's a sign of the times, but the coverage of this has been incredibly polarized, which shouldn't be, because in fact what we have is an ambiguous decision. That's the way I look at it. My own impression is that on some points of detail, yes, they have found against the Premier League. This is absolutely correct, notably for loans made by shareholders. But on the other hand, the very principle of those rules on associated party transactions has been upheld. So it's not as if the judges had said, you know what, this system doesn't work, it's not fair, it's illegal, we have to dismantle it. And in fact, the Premier League, in its statement, said very clearly that they will continue to apply those APT rules, but with slight modifications, which will take into account the numerous findings of the judges. I'm not so sure we should go into the nitty-gritty of the detail, because that would be very boring.
Yeah.
And also we might get some of them wrong, because I'm not a lawyer and some of it is quite complicated. But basically, yes, they have found in favor of Manchester City in certain respects, and they have found in favor of the Premier League on others. And it seems to me that for City to claim victory is a little, it's typical of City. That's what they would do, wouldn't they? Mm-hmm. But I think it's a bit far-fetched. And I also think it's not the end of the story. I think this will carry on and on, as in there will probably be another legal challenge, because the Premier League has certainly not decided to take these APT rules and put them in the freezer. They just want to change the sauce a little bit, but keep the same dish, basically.
Yeah.
So that's starting. And I think in many ways, if you see, they both lost and they both won, and they both lost a lot of money in this by pursuing this. Now, Manchester City don't care at all about that. They can feed teams of barristers, which are, to be honest, it's a bit, the barrister team of Manchester City is a bit like the Chelsea dressing room at the beginning of the season. It's crazy. They've got so many, and the cost must be absolutely phenomenal. But they don't care.
No,
because they've got all the money in the world. It's not the same for the Premier League, because part of it is, of course, all about that. Because Manchester City are doing here this kind of legal bullying, because there's no other word for it. It's something which very, very rich people who do not care about money are very keen on, because they can break people who do not have the same means as they do. That's exactly the way that oligarchs will sue journalists and publications, even if it's completely futile.
Yeah.
And because the only thing they have in mind is to ruin those people. So it's a tug of war, and Manchester City is basically constantly trying the resolve of the Premier League and the other clubs of the Premier League.
Yeah.
And to the extent that if I really wanted to be kicked out of the Premier League, that's exactly what I would do.
I mean, we'll come to that, because there was an email sent by one of City's lawyers to the other Premier League clubs, which I think is kind of extraordinary, and we'll get to that.
Yeah, it is.
But, just to go over the sort of nuts and bolts of the ruling, the Premier League statement said Man City brought a wholesale challenge to the legality, design, framework and implementation of APT rules. The tribunal made 2 findings out of 20-something, I think, in favour of Manchester City. So 19 went in favour of the Premier League. The Premier League said these elements can be quickly and effectively remedied by the league and the clubs. So, I do think the media aspect of this is very interesting, the media landscape in which we live, because I know some people will talk about, influence in... people with deep pockets have influence in the media, and they can get stories out there that suit them, which is fine. I do wonder if it's more a consequence of we live in a world where things have to get out quickly. Therefore, it is easy to sort of parrot a press release rather than look into the nuts and bolts of what has actually been published by the Premier League in the statements and the legalities that have come out. And I realise that obviously takes a lot of work, to sit down and read a 170-something page ruling on something takes time and effort, whereas if you can put out a line that comes from a press office, it's a lot easier and generates a lot more clicks. So I do wonder sometimes if we as football fans and people who, are affected by this, even if, stuff like associated party transaction rules leaves most people pretty fucking cold when it comes to the game of football, we are all affected by it. And therefore there is, I think, a duty on the people who report on the game to do so with a level of accuracy. But the media landscape and the fact that things have got to get out there plays a part in how these things are reported and therefore how they're perceived by the general public. Yes,
I'd like to be as... indulgent as you are. I think some of the coverage was absolutely shocking in its one-eyedness, and it's clear that Manchester City have got some very powerful allies in the media. I won't name names. I think everybody will know who I'm talking about, but there are journalists out there and papers out there who are basically cheerleaders for this club, and of course they will take everything that is leaked to them, everything that they are briefed about, they will just print it and then move on. And if you print a piece in which you say Manchester City claim victory in dispute with Premier League, it's a very different thing to Manchester City victory in dispute with Premier League. And that was totally lost, I thought, in the immediacy of the reporting. And this, as you say, how can you have balanced, nuanced reporting about such a long decision, which most people will find completely incomprehensible? I have to say, I haven't read it in its entirety. I've got better things to do with my life.
Yeah.
What I did is that I talked to lawyer friends of mine who specialize in those issues, sports issues, and asked them what their opinion was. And their opinion was that it was a tough one to talk about, because you could see it one way, you could see the other, and it was a bit of both, basically. Yeah. And that there are, it's the Premier League might have presented a better case for itself, but that's not the first time it would happen. And they don't have the same means anyway at their disposal as Manchester City have in terms of legal resources and resources full stop. But yeah, I mean, it should be part of the duty of the media to report on that as fairly as possible. But in this particular case, I think most people detest Manchester City. Let's be absolutely frank about that. And people would absolutely love it if they were relegated and to the Icelandic 4th division or something like that. But so this is not conducive to, as well, a completely fair assessment of a legal decision. So, but as I said again, Andrew, I think this is here to stay.
Yeah,
it's not as if the matter had been resolved once and for all, because if the Premier League says, and it said it very very clearly, that it intended to keep the APT, ACP, I always say one for the other, rules in place, but just wanted to tweak them a little bit so that they fit in with the decision. Man City is going to come back and say, well, that's not fair. We need to... And it's part of basically part of their tactic, which they've used, now for months, to basically declare war on the Premier League and declare war on the other clubs of the Premier League.
Yeah, I mean,
as we talk of the Premier League is a limited company, right?
Yeah, I mean, they've gone to war with UEFA. If you remember that famous quote, from the Manchester City owner/executive, I can't remember exactly who it was, but like he'd rather spend, however much it took to have 50 lawyers to tie up UEFA for the next 10 years than make any admission or any, cow to any kind of charges that were brought against them. And then it was reported, I will credit this to the Telegraph, Sam Wallace and Tom Morgan in the Telegraph, where Manchester City sent an email to all 19 Premier League rivals in which they dismissed the Premier League summary of the tribunal's findings and claimed that the entirety of the league's associated party transaction rules were now obsolete and invited other clubs to speak to them directly. They talk about, what people think of Manchester City, but I think that is not going to win them any friends in as much as they have friends at Premier League level. I know that there have been these battle lines, if you like, between City, and there were clubs that gave evidence against Manchester City, Arsenal included, and there were clubs which gave evidence in support of Manchester City, and you don't have to, dig too far to find out who those clubs are and why they would be interested in doing that. But we have these sort of battle lines drawn within the Premier League now. I mean, what does it say about the arrogance of Manchester City that they are emailing all other clubs in the Premier League to tell them that the ruling, which people can read in plain English on the Premier League website, which basically they've had a small victory in, they're now insisting to all the other clubs that those rules are obsolete. Does that suggest to you, not that it applies to the finding that has just come out this week, but what they're going to do going forward?
Yes, they're going to be bullies will bully, and they love the act of bullying. And I think there's a kind of a perverse pleasure that they take in bullying people. I think that they couldn't care less, but they care an awful lot at the same time. Their arrogance is such that, and I think it's come to the point that they almost start to believe that what they say is true, which is quite something, because Manchester City and truth, good Lord, discuss. But it's come to the point where they're just enjoying this. They're enjoying being disruptors. They enjoy being rude to people. They enjoy being aggressive, vindictive. They enjoy making other people lose money. They enjoy crushing people. And which, by the way, it must be a sad life being a Manchester City fan, because if you have to swallow all of that on the pretense of titles, so many titles that nobody cares about them anyway, it must be pretty sad. But this being said, there are plenty of people who are happy to be sad about that, apparently. But they're on their own. And the fact is that they use this siege mentality as well, like everybody's against us. In fact, we're the finest bunch of people with the greatest club, the greatest team, blah, blah, blah. All this nonsense, absolute nonsense. But they will carry on.
Yeah.
And of course, this is part of the greater scheme of things, is that they want to exhaust the Premier League and its legal representatives in obviously the process of the 115, 129, 130 charges, whichever you think the correct number is. I think it's 129, by the way.
Right.
So it's part of the process. It's part of this war, and it's a skirmish, which is presented as being a big battle and a big victory, but it probably will be seen as a footnote in the greater story of what is going to happen to the 129 charges, which is happening at the moment, right now.
Yeah.
Very frustrating not to know anything about it. And don't ask me if I've got any idea about what is going on, because I don't.
No, I don't think anybody does at this point.
And I don't think anybody does, but the people who are directly implicated in that. And maybe that's the way it should be anyway. It's a legal process. I mean, but it's part of this whole thing, and it's part of the way they see themselves. Is the absolute arrogance of the rich. And they're a bit like those people, those billionaires who walk into a restaurant, order the most expensive bottle of wine, only drink half of it, and then so that the staff cannot drink the rest of it, they will pour it in empty glasses. I've seen that in big restaurants. I could name names.
No, don't.
And it's just so that the others can't enjoy it, and also it's a reassertion of their own power, because so everything is a win as far as they're concerned, and if it's not a win, if they actually lose something, it's because they are the outsider. They're the poor little individual crushed by the system, by the establishment. I mean, who actually seriously believes that? I mean, think even Manchester City fans must have rare moments of lucidity when they realize, okay, maybe not. But apparently the imbecility of humans is endless. And if people want to be imbeciles because it suits them, they will be.
That's true. I mean, I saw this week a leading... let me just make sure I have the bio right here. A leading sports lawyer on one of the social media platforms talking about this case and saying, all I can say is that we are living in the most exciting time for sports law. Now, that's his profession, and I understand if there are things happening that are challenging and interesting and high profile and perhaps lucrative. But I mean, is that not one of the most depressing things that you've heard in a long time? Because the way football and the way sport has gone is now so intertwined with high finance, dodgy finance, and we'll come to that in a moment, and the law that... here we are talking about it being the most exciting time for sports law, not necessarily about how the game has developed, how the game has progressed, how football has become something more than football in a really positive way, rather than something that is not just played on the pitch but played out in the courts.
Yeah, I have to say I find this attitude profoundly depressing, as I'm sure you do. It's a bit like, I don't know, we're living a really exciting time for the development of facial recognition. That's brilliant. So that's really exciting. No, I mean, that's, he's probably making a lot of money out of that. I don't know. I had missed that. And to be honest, I'm happy I'd missed it. And I'd prefer if you hadn't said anything. But you did.
It's out there
now. That's the way it is. It's people getting excited about... I mean, is it going to become like the new version of excitement about the transfer system? Like football is no longer about what is being played. It's about where the players are going to go or not go. And now it's about the next legal case.
Yeah, we've signed a great new lawyer. We've brought on board a new incredible law firm. Maybe football clubs will have their law firm partners going forward.
Yeah. Well, what a day this will be. It's thoroughly depressing. I can understand from a professional. I wouldn't say it's great. I think it's a fascinating time for sports law because it is being challenged absolutely everywhere, and that is true. Because we could take examples, and I'm sure we're going to talk about a couple of others with apologies. But it is a moment where suddenly there is a reality check that the legal framework in which sports operates no longer suits or fits the type of sport that is being practiced and sold globally, and therefore something has got to be done. And all the texts which are in place, the regulations in place, are being tested constantly. Because yes, I suppose from a certain point of view, it is exciting for a lawyer, but the way that was being said, I mean, it's fairly depressing.
Yeah.
Fairly depressing, really.
I mean, one of the challenges that has come up lately has been Lasana Diarra, who did play for Arsenal for a few months, and there's a ruling, that the FIFA transfer regulations are. Is it contrary to EU law in certain ways? I mean, what way do you expect that situation to develop? Will it be as seismic, do you think, as the Bosman, or is this something which will apply in a smaller number of cases, or are we on the cusp maybe of seeing the transfer system as we know it go in a completely different direction?
Right. First of all, I feel far more confident talking about this than about the APT.
Sure.
Because I've been working on this Diarra case for months, and in fact for longer than that. And there again, the reaction to the ruling, which found in favor of Diarra, and that is totally unequivocal, Diarra and his lawyers won. The attitude, whether it's going to have a big impact or not, varies tremendously. And I've been speaking to people who are honestly some of the finest legal minds in sports law, and who have very different attitudes towards the ruling. Because some will say, again, the ruling only addresses a few points of detail which FIFA can alter in its regulations in order to be in agreement with EU law about fair competition, freedom of movement, right to work, and so forth. Yeah, you can see it like that, and I can see what they're saying. But when I read the judgments, when I read first the opinion of the Advocate General, which was back in April, and then when I read the judgment, because this one I did read, I thought that the language which was used by the judges was a language which opened the door to a number of other challenges. And it's the way that, for example, FIFPro, in their statement, the way they presented it, and I think FIFPro is, on this occasion, closer to the truth of what could happen than, for example, FIFA is, who just said, it's a point of detail, that's fine, blah, blah. We don't need to transform everything. What it does change, the fundamental rule, is the fact that if you're in a job, right, and you decide, and you've been actually talked to by another company or something, which propose you a really good job, better salary, better place, more interesting, blah, blah. So you want to leave your job, but of course you've got a period. You cannot just leave your job just like that. You've signed a contract. But you can do it. What you do is that you go to your HR department or your boss and you explain, I would like to exercise my right to leave the company, the 6 months, blah, blah, gardening leave, whatever it's going to be. And then you go. And nobody objects to that. But if you're a footballer, you can't do that. And the judgment that they have given is a judgment which, for me, would enable a player or players or a players' union to go forth and say there is absolutely no reason why a player should have fewer rights than a normal employee. A player is an employee. Why is it that, let's say, for example, I don't know. You see, I've taken Cole Palmer's example. You see a young player who was signed for actually not a huge amount of money and given a 10-year contract, or 9 years and a half, whatever it was. Yeah. So he's contracted until June 2033. It might be that at one point he sees the light and sees that Chelsea is the wrong club for him. And and he's got an offer from, I don't know, it could be a club abroad, it could be a club in Britain. And he decides, well, that's it, I want to go, and that's it. Now, as it stands at the moment, he couldn't do that, or he would have to do all the things that players do to get rid of a contract, start to sulk, play badly, whatever. You know what happens when that happens.
Yeah.
But there is no reason why he should say, well, you know what, I want to leave. I'm giving you 6 months notice, but in 6 months, I want to move to this club. That is now the absolute foundation of the transfer system we're talking about here. And the question is whether FIFA would agree to, say, if Real Madrid or Barcelona, one of those clubs, wanted, called Parma, if FIFA would be willing to issue an international transfer certificate, an ITC, which was at the bottom of the situation between Lasana Diarra and Lokomotiv Moscow and Charleroi and FIFA. And that, to me, would be a complete revolution of the whole system. It would actually make it explode. And what I do think is that it will be at the back of the minds of people at FIFA that this is something which could happen, that the door is now ajar, and it's now up to somebody else to come in and push it further, or see if it's possible to push it further. And I think that despite FIFA's obsession with basically being the alpha and omega of football and being on top and controlling and dictating everything in football, I think that there is a point where the obligation to move to something which resembles collective bargaining is going to happen. So I don't think it's something, the Diarra decision in itself is not going to change the next transfer market. But it has now opened, as I said, the door is ajar. So you will see the impact over years. It will be an incremental impact. It will be progressive impact. It won't be something as dramatic as the Bosman ruling, which was very clear. And that suddenly from one day to the next, that's it. You knew that you couldn't do this anymore. This is different. Now the system will be tested. And I do think it is an absolutely hugely important ruling, but it's not being presented that way because the impact is not immediate. It's an impact that's going to be felt over years and years.
Do you think this is something that is incumbent on players or FIFPro, who are the representative body for professional players, to push in the direction which most benefits the players themselves, obviously, which is why this case was taken, or the governing body, FIFA or UEFA, coming together and sitting down and saying, okay, the genie is out of the bottle, the horse is out of the stable, we can't put it back in. We have to come up with a solution that applies legally within the framework that exists within European law and across the world. I mean, do you think that is something that they will do, or do you think they will simply react to the next big shift?
They will simply react to the next big shift. This is Gianni Infantino's FIFA. It doesn't like to do things such as a discussion with other stakeholders. It's actually a complaint that you hear from everybody, especially from FIFPro, but not just from FIFPro, also from some club organizations, and is that they take their decisions and then they pretend that some kind of consultation has taken place where none has. I mean, the perfect example of that is the fact that in December, the Congress, FIFA is going to deploy the red carpet, or unroll the red carpet for the 2030 and 2034 host nations, and that they've decided, well, Gianni Infantino has decided that there wouldn't be two votes, as you would have expected, even though there are only two candidates. But there will be one vote en bloc, which means that member associations, which would have wanted to protest against the award of the World Cup to Saudi Arabia, won't be able to do it without also having to vote against Portugal, Spain, Morocco, which of course is going to be very tricky. So that's the way FIFA works these days. They don't believe in. I mean, their idea of consultation is basically to take a decision, then go to you and to say, you say yes, of course. And in this particular case, you don't expect FIFA to give away any of its power, any of it.
Yeah.
And it will be up to players' organizations and to players organizations to do something about it. Now, will this happen? I don't know, because when I read the FIFPro statement, it was quite strong, because basically it said that it's the whole ethos and the whole principles on which the current transfer market regulations are based are wrong, according to the judgment. And you can read the judgment a little bit like that, in as much that, yes, it recognizes that there are some inbuilt problems within the current system and that they should be addressed. But how they're going to be addressed is a different question altogether.
Yeah.
And FIFA is not going to make the first step for that. They don't believe in that.
Sure.
And what they want, and they've been very clear, they want to become, they are the international, they are the house, the clearinghouse of all international transfers. And they want to assert this role, this responsibility, and this power forevermore. So the judgment goes against that.
The role of players and players' power within the game and player representation within the game is one that's been up for discussion for a long time. But we are seeing more and more players talk about the demands that are being placed on them. I really enjoyed the story about Infantino calling an emergency meeting with broadcasters because nobody's bought the rights to the FIFA Club World Cup, which, tells me nobody's really that interested. Not just because broadcasters aren't interested and don't want to pay what people want, but fans and football supporters aren't really interested in this, competition that nobody needs, right? But we've heard from players like Rodri, who has since suffered an ACL injury. He wouldn't have been alone. I think Antonio Rudiger spoke about this. As much as anybody is prepared to listen to anything Marc Cucurella says, he has spoken about it in the last couple of days as well. And the idea that players are being asked to do too much, that this is now essentially a 12-month-a-year job. There's no time off. There's no rest. There's no, I don't want to say downtime, because that's, people don't connect with that when you're talking about people who are paid hundreds of thousands of pounds a week to play football. But there is player welfare, and it is one of those discussions that is kind of ethereal because people talk about it, but nobody ever does anything about it. Is there a chance, or is there the possibility that in tandem with these ideas that players are being asked to do too much and players are picking up serious injuries, potentially career-threatening injuries, or certainly injuries that can impact a career in a negative way, and you can just look at all the players down the years who've had ACL injuries, who has come back exactly the same and just as good. It's a short list. Every player, I think, who's had a big injury like that has been impacted in one way or the other, throughout their career. Is there a possibility that these legalities that are going on within the transfer system may play a part in how players feel like they can address this issue themselves via either their representative bodies or, the word strike has been used more than once. I think it's unlikely we'll ever see that. But, the fact that it is being talked about a bit more suggests that within the game, and certainly among players, this is a conversation that's happening more and more.
It is. And but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to go beyond words. Yeah. I've lost count of the number of times that the idea of a strike has been mooted within FIFPro actually, and by players. I remember Eric Cantona and Diego Maradona at one point tried to organize something, didn't they? Kind of general strike. Didn't really work out. It would have been fun though. But there's also the added problem that the craziness of the calendar, which absolutely nobody is denying, is something which concerns only a very, very, very small proportion of football players. Most football players, 99% of professional football players do not play 65 or 70 games a year. Or even I think Bruno Fernandes played 80 at one point. It's not that they're not submitted to the same level of physical demands as the top players are. So it's a bit more difficult for that to have a genuine movement which will federate all football players. It's very much the cream of the crop. We are getting this problem, but it doesn't mean the problem is not real, and it doesn't mean that it doesn't affect hundreds, in fact, thousands of players. It does, but it's going to be difficult to federate all football players about that, and all football players' unions, because some of them will be far less concerned about it than others. That's one thing. Second thing, there's been a lot of talk and very, very little action, and it's always the same, I've talked to people within those organizations, and in private they will look at you and you say it is an option. We will definitely be considering whatever, and that they will consider it, then they will leave it aside, because how are you going to organize that? How is it going to be perceived by the public at large? I don't know. On the other hand, if the Diarra case leads to the adoption of a kind of collective bargaining model, which is what we have, for example, in US sports, then you might actually see an empowerment of the players, which would mean that, actually, no, we think that is totally out of order. We're not going to be part of it. I think the Club World Cup is the perfect time to, if they want to demonstrate some clout and to demonstrate some willingness to challenge the system for good, and for real and for good, it's a perfect occasion to do that.
Yeah.
Because nobody cares about this bloody Club World Cup. It's nonsense. The players will be absolutely shattered. Quite a few of them will have been involved in their various, Champions Leagues, whatever the continents are. And then they will think, well, my goodness, how are we going to be able to prepare for the season after that? And the answer is that you won't. You genuinely won't. If you treat that Club World Cup seriously, and you have to abide by the rules of the 4 weeks holidays, you won't have a pre-season. If you don't have a pre-season, the problem is not just that your team will not click the same way, but also you get far more injuries, because a lot of the pre-season is preventive work to build up the physical stamina of players so that they can actually cope with the physical demands of the game.
I mean, this Club World Cup is basically an Infantino ego project, right? Just as a thing that he wants, and to sort of demonstrate or get more. It's not as if FIFA don't have enough money. You know what I mean? There's literally no need for this. If they were desperately trying to salvage themselves and sell TV rights and advertising and sponsorships, to keep the organization afloat for the, in inverted commas, the benefit of the game, because, they love the game more than anything, and that's their thing. But, it's a completely unnecessary thing to ask of the players.
Totally. There's no need for it. There's certainly no need for it. You remember what Carlo Ancelotti said when he was told, which was magnificent. He said, we're not taking part. We're not going to that bloody thing. It makes absolutely no sense in one respect, because if it were to succeed and become a genuine Club World Cup, which would be seen as a major trophy, it would mean that FIFA would organize the greatest tournament on the planet for clubs as it does for national teams, which is basically one in the eye of UEFA. So that's, there's obviously a political, political gain to be made there. But also I think it has to do with the megalomania of the current administration, who basically, I think they're genuinely convinced that they're the best administration there's ever been, and that any kind of criticism is almost sacrilegious, and it can only be done by people who have an agenda against them. That's all there is. You're so mean, as Gianni Infantino said to journalists when he spoke to journalists, because he hasn't done that for over a year now. Brilliant. So yes, it has to do with this obsession with controlling everything. It's a kind of panopticon. He wants to see everything, and not only that, he wants to control and shape everything. So clubs should be, should play their greatest competition under the umbrella of FIFA, not under the umbrella of a confederation. No. So let's have the Club World Cup, and then he saw that as well as part of his great plan to dominate football with the help of the Saudis, because he thought the Saudis would put the money up, in which he was wrong. And then suddenly he has a problem. As he had a problem with the so-called African Football League, which was supposed to be this prestigious competition, which would have 20 or 23 clubs, would have a massive pot of money to distribute, and in the end, because the Saudis didn't play ball on this one, they're not that stupid. They're left with a competition that nobody's interested in, and which I do hope is what's going to happen to the Club World Cup.
Yes, it would be good. I think if
it would be brilliant. I mean, we shouldn't cover it. We shouldn't even think about it. We shouldn't talk about this. It's nonsense. It's a glorified post-season tour. I think it's going to mean a lot to some clubs. Like, I'm sure if you come from a so-called lesser confederation, the idea that you're going to play against the Real Madrids and of this world, and that you may get a chance to beat them in the official competition, is going to be certainly a great motivation. But for the rest, bloody hell.
Yeah. Well, like you, I hope it falls flat on its face, and I hope that they don't find broadcasting partners. But there is still obviously some time to go, and the emergency meeting, I'm sure Gianni Infantino will find some way to incentivize somebody to bring the TV cameras along one way or the other. I do want to talk to you a little bit about Arsenal, obviously, and I'm curious as to your thoughts on the season so far. It's been challenging in many respects for various reasons, between injuries and red cards and the fixture list, and all of those things have provided a kind of a difficult cocktail, I think, for Mikel Arteta and for the players. But I think they've come through it pretty well in the opening stages. So I'm curious as to how you found the opening part of this season so far.
I found it highly satisfactory in many regards. I think one of the most important challenges is coping with the absence of key players.
Yeah.
And, the fact that Arsenal's been able to produce terrific results, even if the football has not always been exceptional, by the way, but without their number one creator and captain is terrific. The fact that also, well, suddenly that's it, Timber is injured again or whatever. There's always something happening. And I think the team has been able, and Arteta, the team have been able to cope with that remarkably well, I must say. Yes, excuse me?
I was going to ask you about Odegaard in particular, because I do think when he got injured, there was a sense that this would be the most challenging aspect for Arsenal. And I think what's been very pleasing for me is that, look, we all know this is a very good team with very good players, but what you're looking for are people who can step up when the going is a little bit tough, if you like. Like a rising tide lifts all boats, and if Martin Odegaard is providing chance after chance after chance for people every game, that's great. But when you don't have that, do you have the players who can still contribute? And I think, thinking of Bukayo Saka and Kai Havertz in particular, two guys who really have taken that challenge and responded to it in an incredibly positive way.
And you can add to that the fact that Gabriel Jesus his poor form is carrying on, and he's actually now becoming, I think, for all of us who actually really love the guy and the footballer, is becoming quite concerning now. So it's not as if there were huge resources in that compartment either. I think the players, there are others. I mean, I've been very impressed with the way Mikel Merino has performed in recent games when we've seen him. I really, really like the way he slots in. We can be very grateful to our central defenders again.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't even mention them because we've got so used to it, but we should not be so used to it that we become complacent and forget how lucky we are to have such a strong back three. I was going to say Raya, Gabriel, and Saliba. That is extraordinary. But the football, and that's perhaps a reflection of the players of the absentees. The football hasn't been fantastic, not always. You saw, for example, I was at the Southampton game. First half was really, apart from the first 10 minutes, where basically they were on the rack. I have to say that afterwards, there was a degree of, we're showing our limits here in a way. We have this, we're not one of those teams that can, we're one of those teams which sometimes has those off days against so-called lesser opponents. And it did have, but again, they found the resources. And I mean, the transformation of Kai Havertz is unbelievable.
Did you expect anything like what we've seen? Did you expect?
No.
I mean, when he signed from Chelsea, I think there was a lot of scrutiny, a lot of concern. Leave aside the transfer fee, but obviously a very highly rated player at Bayer Leverkusen. Chelsea is Chelsea, and it's a weird place to be for any player, I think. And look, he did things there that will put him in their history books. But people were concerned, or not convinced that he could necessarily recapture the spark, let's say, that he had at Bayer Leverkusen.
Yes, because I mean, to be honest, I'm just saying again what everybody's been saying before, is that nobody seemed to be quite sure about where he should be played, because he can play in so many positions. But it seems Arteta is the one who has found the key, and he's not just found the key to the tactical positioning, but he obviously has found the key to the persona, to the character. Because Havertz is never a player. I mean, his class has been obvious for so long, but he's never a player that struck you by a feeling of joy playing the game. I mean, he has got this expression. I mean, I maintain he's a dead ringer for Franz Kafka, and he is. But he doesn't have this kind of expression which suddenly lights up with a beaming smile. He's not Bukayo Saka, let's put it that way. He's not as demonstrative as Bukayo is. But he seems to be playing with a kind of verve and appetite and hunger that I've never seen him display in the past. And I don't know if it struck, I mean, for me, against Southampton, of course, his goal was beautiful, by the way, absolutely beautiful and crucial, came at exactly the right time and actually changed the flow of the game. But I think it was in the 90th minute, we're already leading 3-1. The game is sewn up. He absolutely bust a gut to fight for a ball near the corner flag, and he fought with one player and two players and three players, and he got the ball. And the reaction of the stadium, of the crowd, I mean, there's nothing we like more to see in a player, is there?
Sure.
That this willingness to really give absolutely everything. And he did it, and he'd done his job. He could have ignored it. No, he's obviously found some extra motivation, some extra needle. And he's maybe he's a personification of what this team is becoming. As in really tough. Yeah. He's a really tough bugger. And Arsenal is becoming a really tough team. And which is lovely. It would be lovely to bully a few people.
Yeah, for sure.
For a change.
No, I agree. I mean, I thought his comments after, it could have been the PSG game where he said, I didn't used to relish the physical side of the game, and winning duels and those kinds of things was something that it wasn't really part of who he was as a player, and now he's absolutely loving it. A lot of people have made the point or sort of drawn a line between that game last season at Newcastle where he was booked for, a pretty aggressive sliding tackle, and he got booked. And I think on the day, a yellow card is fine, considering Bruno Guimaraes was given a yellow card, or not even given anything, for elbowing Jorginho in the head. So I don't want to get into the discussion of whether he should have been sent off for that challenge or not, but it did feel like a moment where, if the penalty against Bournemouth kind of changed something from his confidence levels, that game seemed to spark something in him in terms of fight. And he's a big guy. He's not the brawny, but he's certainly tall. And that game, and what we've seen from him since, is a level that maybe Chelsea fans, it might have been something that frustrated Chelsea fans. And I don't care about Chelsea fans, obviously, or what they think. But, there were times where you're thinking, does he have, just enough about him? And he's got more than enough right now.
Yeah, well, we've got the answer to that. He's got the about him. He's been a true leader on the pitch. And also he's getting better and better at... and he's showing it. I mean... the way that people seem to realize that he can be a proper number 9 and score typical number 9 goals. And the fact that it's a surprise for many. Well, that is a surprise, that it should be a surprise, because he's got all the attributes. By the way, just thinking of that, his height. Did you know that? I think in the last game, Southampton, 6 of our outfield players were taller than our keeper.
No, I didn't know that, but yeah.
It's quite remarkable. They're huge. They're absolutely... It must be the biggest Arsenal team since the Invincibles, because the Invincibles was also physically super imposing. And there were some big guys there.
Yeah.
But it must be in physical terms the most, which is why I've had this strange idea floating in my head, that we are seeing Mikel Arteta, first of all, becoming Mikel Arteta. And then we realize, right, that it's got nothing to do with Arsene Wenger. It's a completely different type of football. And you know what? It's got nothing to do with Pep Guardiola either. He's not mini Pep. It's totally different type of football. And I was thinking, you know what? Really strong defense, loads of goals on dead ball situations, pretty aggressive and playing on the line, all these sort of things, relying on a couple of fantasistas to make the difference. I think it sounds to me a bit like a George Graham team of the great years, which is weird.
Yeah.
The other one we should mention is that I do think, maybe it's because I hope it so much, because I love that player. I think we're starting to see the Gabi Martinelli of old coming back. When I say of old, of just a year ago, I think there are signs that he's coming back, and that he's not thinking about his game too much as he was doing, because the qualities that never deserted him. It's just he doesn't need to think as much as he does. She's the problem that Gabriel Jesus has got at the moment. Every time he receives the ball, it's like he's being asked 10 questions and he couldn't answer one, but the 9 others he won't, and therefore he loses the ball or takes the wrong decision. Yeah. But Martinelli, I think, is also coming back. Is coming back to the kind of form which has made him an absolutely indispensable. And there are other things like Sterling's first start was actually very encouraging. I mean, there are loads of things, and you look at all that, and you look at the schedule, which has been absolutely atrocious, and you look where we are now. You think, wow, it shows how much way we've made, that we can consider this to be a good start to the season and not an exceptional start to the season.
Yeah, I think
which it would have been just like 3 years ago.
Yeah, you're absolutely
right. Been going. It's absolutely unbelievable what we're doing.
Yeah, it is promising. It is promising, and fingers crossed we come through this next international break without any more problems. I think we've suffered enough, certainly in the opening part of this season, anyway, and we look forward to more to come when this international break resumes. For now, though, we better leave it there. As ever, Philippe, thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you very much indeed to Philippe Auclair. You can find him in some of the usual social media places. I think he's mostly on Blue Sky now, as people seek alternatives to Twitter, whether it's Threads, whether it's Blue Sky, or somewhere else, or nowhere else. Nowhere else is also a good alternative to Twitter. You can find Philippe over on Blue Sky for the most part, I think. Just search his name there and up he will pop. Speaking of Twitter, by the way, we did a great interview over on Patreon this week with Ryan Mack, who is an Arsenal fan and a tech reporter for the New York Times, and he has co-authored a book about Twitter and the takeover of Twitter by Elon Musk and how things have gone since then. The book is called Character Limit. It's out now. It's in the shops. I do recommend it in a big way. It's just a fascinating insight into everything that's happened on that platform, and some of the reporting, the detail of the reporting is just incredible, kind of jaw-dropping. But if you'd like to hear more about that and you'd like to get access to everything that we do on Patreon, which, by the way, supports all of the stuff that we do on Arseblog, you can sign up at patreon.com/Arseblog. That is patreon.com/Arseblog for just $6 a month. So there you go. Right, I am going to go get a Lemsip and some paracetamol or some Solpadeine or whatever, or maybe all of the above, a lovely medicine cocktail. Hopefully that will get me back on track. Thank you very much indeed, as always, for being here today. Hope you enjoyed the show. Myself and James will have an Arsecast extra for you, I think, on Sunday. I'm not 100% on that yet, though. Sunday, Monday, we'll definitely have it for you one of those days. Right, I'm leaving it there. Thank you again for listening. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we will catch you on the next one. Until then, cheers. Bye-bye.